This isn't just my victory. It's for everyone who was ever told, you don't fit here.
They say home is where the heart is. But what if your very identity denies you that shelter? This is the story of a man who knocked on countless doors only to be rejected for reasons he never imagined, until one truth about his race shattered: the silence. Stay with me, because once you hear what happened next, you'll never look at the word home the same way again. And if stories that reveal hidden truths move you, make sure to subscribe and share this journey. In a small, bustling city, tucked between narrow streets and crowded markets, lived a man named Daniel. He was a teacher, known for his calm voice and steady patience. For years, Daniel had rented small apartments, always saving and dreaming of owning a place he could finally call his own. A place where he could hang family photos without fear of losing the deposit, where he could plant a tree in the backyard and watch it grow as he grew old. Daniel wasn't extravagant. He didn't want a mansion or a luxury condo, just a simple, warm house with enough space for his books, his little garden, and the sound of laughter when friends came over. After years of saving every extra coin, he finally had enough to begin his search. Real estate agents showed him dozens of listings: bright kitchens, spacious living rooms, quiet neighborhoods. It all felt like a dream coming closer. He would stand in empty houses and picture where the couch might go, or how sunlight would hit the dining table in the morning. He was filled with hope, but as he applied for mortgages and tried to negotiate with sellers, Daniel noticed something strange. Meetings that started warmly ended coldly. Smiles disappeared the moment his paperwork was reviewed. Some excuses were subtle. The house just went under offer. Others were blunt. We don't think you'll be a good fit for this community. Still, Daniel pressed on, believing that persistence would win. After all, he was qualified, stable, and ready. He refused to let the small rejections break his spirit. Yet deep inside, he didn't know that something beyond credit checks or documents was working against him. Something about who he was and where he came from was silently shutting every door he tried to open. It was on a crisp autumn morning when Daniel faced the first insult that could no longer be brushed aside. He had just walked into a tidy little house on Maple Street. The porch creaked, the walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, and for the first time he felt like this could be it, the place he'd been waiting for. The agent, a middle-aged man with sharp glasses and a polished smile, greeted him warmly. They walked through the house together, the kitchen gleaming, the living room wide enough for bookshelves, and the backyard holding the promise of evening tea under the open sky. Daniel's heart raced with possibility. But then, when it came, time to talk numbers. The smile faded. The agent scanned his documents, then looked up slowly. I'm afraid this home won't be the right fit for you. Daniel blinked. Why not? Everything matches your requirements. My credit is solid. My job is stable. The man shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated. The seller has certain expectations. We've had some issues before with, well, people of your background. Daniel froze. My background. The man's words slipped out, low but heavy. They prefer buyers who align with the neighborhood. You understand? In that moment, the weight of unspoken prejudice became undeniable. Daniel wasn't being denied for his finances or his character. He was being denied because of the race stamped quietly onto his identity, something he had no power to change, no matter how honest, hard-working, or deserving he was. He left the house with the polished floors and bright windows, but the sting clung to him like cold rain. On the outside, the rejection seemed routine, but inside, Daniel felt something burning, anger mixed with disbelief. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about dignity. About being told, silently but clearly, you don't belong here. And while he tried to steady himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because once a door slams in your face for who you are, you start to notice. How many doors were never meant to open at all? After Maple Street, Daniel began to see the pattern everywhere. Each house tour, each meeting, carried the same script: warm welcomes, polite smiles, then the quiet rejection once his identity surfaced. It was like a silent code written between sellers and agents. He doesn't belong. At one house, a young couple selling their home shook his hand eagerly. They even told him they liked teachers, steady income, reliable. But when Daniel returned the next week with an offer in hand, the husband wouldn't even meet his eyes. The wife whispered, "We've decided to wait for another buyer, someone who fits better. 2 words that stung deeper than a slap. On another day, as Daniel left a showing, he overheard the agent mutter to a colleague, "He looks nice, but the neighbors would complain." That sentence echoed in his mind like a curse. Neighbors? He hadn't even moved in, and already invisible walls had been built against him. The community itself seemed to shift around him. Some people gave him sympathetic looks as if they knew but dared not speak. Others stared with suspicion, as though his very presence threatened their comfort. Twist after twist, Daniel's resolve was tested. He received letters marked "Application Denied," with no explanation. He called back on listings only to find they'd suddenly sold. Yet weeks later, those same homes remained advertised. Friends urged him to let it go, to search in different neighborhoods, where you'll be accepted. But Daniel couldn't. Why should he be forced into corners when he had earned the right to stand anywhere? Each rejection became fuel, each insult another beat in the rising drum of tension inside him. And yet, there was always the lingering question, what will it take for the truth to finally reveal itself? How far would these silent gatekeepers go to keep him out? Every day the weight grew heavier, until the moment came when the walls of secrecy would collapse, exposing the raw truth about why Daniel was being denied home after home. One evening, after weeks of rejection, Daniel stumbled upon a house that felt different. It was small, nothing extravagant but warm, like it had been waiting just for him. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, welcomed him in without hesitation. She poured tea, asked about his work as a teacher, and even said she wanted her home to go to someone who would fill it with love. For the first time in months, Daniel's hope flickered alive. He left that night believing he might finally have found his place. But just 2 days later, the call came. Her voice trembled as she explained, "I'm so sorry, Daniel. The neighbors, they came to me. They said things about you, about your race. They told me selling to you would change the street. I don't agree with them, but I can't. I can't fight everyone around me." Daniel stood frozen, the phone pressed tight to his ear. There it was, the truth, finally spoken out, loud, not hidden in polite rejections or vague excuses. This time someone admitted it plainly. He was being denied, not because of who he was, but because of what he was. His chest tightened. Rage mixed with sorrow. He realized it wasn't just a string of bad luck. It was a system, a chain of silent agreements binding entire neighborhoods. And as he hung up the call, his heart pounded with one relentless question. If every door closes because of his race, where will Daniel ever find home? The answer was coming, but before it did, Daniel would face the biggest revelation of his life, one that would turn the entire battle upside down. The night after that crushing call, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced his tiny rented apartment, the walls closing in on him like a cage. Every rejection replayed in his mind. The forced smiles, the coded words, the phone calls that ended in silence. And now the truth had been spoken aloud. His race was the unspoken lock on every door. But sometimes when the world pushes too hard, something inside snaps into clarity. For Daniel, it was the realization that he could no longer fight in silence. He needed to confront this, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The very next morning, he gathered every document. His mortgage approvals, letters of rejection, even notes from agents. He started recording his experiences, documenting the pattern that had haunted him for months. Piece by piece, he built a case that couldn't be brushed aside. Then came the moment of courage. Daniel stood in front of the city council's housing committee, his voice steady, his presence unshaken. "I am a teacher," he began. "I have done everything required to qualify for a home. Yet over and over, I am denied, not because of my finances, not because of my behavior, but because of my race. And if this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." The room fell silent. Some council members shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward, their eyes locked on him. Daniel's words cut through the air like thunder. As he laid out his evidence, letters, overheard remarks, the heartbreaking phone call from the woman who confessed her neighbor's pressure, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was systemic. News spread. Local reporters picked up his story. Headlines blazed across papers. Teacher denied homes over race, exposes silent discrimination. People who had faced similar struggles began stepping forward, sharing their own stories. Daniel's pain had become a spark, igniting a fire of awareness. But the climax wasn't just in the exposure, it was in what happened next. A prominent civil rights lawyer reached out to him, offering to file a lawsuit against the agencies that had participated in this discriminatory web. Daniel agreed, not for vengeance, but for justice. The courtroom battle that followed was fierce. Agents denied, twisted words, and tried to mask their prejudice as policy. But Daniel's calm testimony, supported by evidence and the voices of others who came forward, painted a picture too clear to ignore. When the verdict came, the judge's voice rang with finality. "This court finds that discriminatory practices have indeed been carried out. Such actions violate the fundamental right to fair housing. Restitution will be made and changes enforced." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, not because he had won, but because the wall that once felt unbreakable had cracked. Weeks later, he stood once again on Maple Street. The very house where the first insult had scarred him was now within reach. This time the door opened freely. Papers were signed, keys were placed in his hand. Daniel stepped inside, the polished floors beneath his feet, sunlight streaming through the windows. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that silence could be broken, that injustice could be fought, and that a man denied home could at last claim one. And as he planted his first flower in the yard, he whispered to himself, "This isn't just for me. This is for everyone who was told they don't belong. Today we take our place, home. For most, it's just a building with walls and a roof. But for Daniel, it became something much larger, a symbol of belonging, dignity, and the fight against silent chains of prejudice. His journey revealed a truth many try to ignore. Sometimes the hardest walls are not made of bricks, but of bias. The moral here is simple, yet powerful. Your value is not defined by the barriers others build around you. Society may deny, reject, or try to push you out, but courage has the power to turn rejection into revolution. When one voice rises against injustice, it can echo loud enough to shake entire systems. Daniel's story isn't just his. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they weren't a good fit. Anyone who was judged not by their character, but by their color, name, or background. His victory wasn't about one house on Maple Street. It was about tearing down invisible fences so others could step through freely. And here's the lesson. When life slams doors in your face, remember, it only takes one act of persistence, one refusal to accept silence, to change the story. Discrimination thrives in shadows. But the moment someone dares to shine a light, the shadows scatter. So the next time you feel denied, overlooked, or pushed aside, carry Daniel's words in your heart. This isn't just for me. This is for everyone who was told they don't belong, because belonging isn't a privilege granted by others. It's a right we all carry, and if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of resilience and truth, then don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe so you never miss another story that dares to speak what others keep silent. And most of all, stand with those who are still knocking on closed doors. Together, we can make sure those doors open, not just for one man, but for everyone.